title of this message is The Fred Factor. The Fred Factor. And that's kind of a strange title. We could have titled it Fighting Negativity. And part of what we want to say is because there's so much bad news and the media stirs up hatred for certain traditional value politicians in this country, and a lot of good things are not covered. So you get a distorted view of things. There's a lot of negativity. So there's a book. The book is called The Fred Factor. I want to just take a few things out of The Fred Factor, just for a few minutes, things that can be done to help us overcome the negativity in society. The Fred Factor. Okay, there was a postman who was wonderful. And the things you learn from Fred will give us a feel of how to take your situation, make the best of it, and be really great servant leaders. He was an amazing mailman. The first thing Fred did when he got his new route, he introduced himself to everybody on the route, went out of his way to get to know them, let them know who he was, and he was going to give them the best postal service they've ever had, and that he was their friend. You know, I'm going to be here to, he'd say things like, anything I can do for you, even above and beyond, you let me know. And he meant it. Wasn't just saying it to be saying it. He talked with them. He got to know them. You know, when you go out of town, you have to fill out some paperwork, give it to the mailman, and they hold your mail, and you tell them when to bring it back. Well, he did that for people, a lot of them. He got to know their schedule. This is when you go for your summer trip or your winter trip, and they didn't have to do the paperwork. He would hold their mail and then bring it back in one big basket when they got back. He did that for them. Also, he would hide, like say you get a UPS package. If you leave it right on their doorstep on the porch, there in the city he was in at least, there are people who drive by and they'd steal your packages. They don't do that in my neighborhood. Hope it stays that way. But anyway, he would take the package and hide it behind some bushes nearby. He would tell them later where it was. So they didn't have to worry about packages being stolen. He would patrol his route, sort of like an off-duty one-man neighborhood crime watch. Kind of notify people of suspicious people and the police of things going on. And he'd ask, anything more that I can do, and really meant it. And the Fred Factor book lists six principles. But since God always has 7, that's God's number of completion. I added one more myself to make it 7. So one more that's not in Fred's book. So let's look at the 7 factors briefly. Factor number 1, and being a Fred, in the Fred Factor. Do good and you will feel good. Think about it. Do good and you will feel good. In other words, when you know you're doing your best, you feel better about stuff. Because do good and you feel good. I imagine if you slack off and do a bad job or let people down, you might get away with it, but it really won't make you feel good. Feel good and you will do good. I probably should add this. I didn't put it in as a formal point, but I should add this. Of course, you do have to worry about people taking advantage of you. So you should pray for wisdom. And there are a lot of people that take advantage of good people. And that's a tough subject to deal with because people will lie to you. Oh, well. Go in the rental business and you'll find out what I mean. But do good and you'll feel good. It fights negativity. Factor number 2, the best Freds never rest. They're always helpful. In other words, you don't some days I'll be up, some days I'll be down. Some days I'll be on the job, some days I won't. He tried to be the good servant all the time, every day, 5 days a week, every day he was working. He tried to be up. So be helpful on a regular basis. Factor number 3, treat people as friends. Now, I'm going to read a scripture, but I'm going to give you the backdrop. It happened more than once. Christ's disciples were jockeying as to who was going to be the greatest because they were expecting Christ to take over and rule the world, and they have high positions. Like, John's mother came to him, "Can my two sons be on your right hand, your left, your number one and two man?" And others, they jockey a lot. So I'm going to read Matthew 23:11. Here's what Christ said to those men who were jockeying for power positions. "But he that is greatest among you shall be your servant." And we all know what Christ meant. He meant that the one who serves the most, people come to rely on him. And they need him a lot because he's the one giving the most service. He becomes more vital and important because he's the one that's serving. And you hear about, there's one historic example. I don't know if it's the best one, but one that won a great victory for the British at a time when, it was quite unexpected. Wellington. He's actually in, he was a famous duke. I forgot all of his titles, but one of the things that made him so good was he took care of his soldiers. He made sure they had good shoes, well-fed, dry feet. You might think dry feet's not a big thing. When you're marching through rivers and marshes and crossing creeks, and they didn't have all the bridge equipment they have nowadays, that's a big deal. Because he took so good care of his men, when he needed them to come through for him, they did. And actually, it's actually kind of sad. After all, many victories, we went back to England, and a lot of the top people were so jealous of his success. Anyway, pettiness is in politics. It's one of those things that you see in real world history. But because he served his men so well, that's what a good leader does, a good parent does. And especially when it comes to parents, you're not always rewarded. Because let's face it, kids don't always appreciate what you do for them. And, anyway, we could talk more about that, but you get the general idea. If you serve people, that's how you become more important. 1 Peter 3:8. 1 Peter 3:8, Peter says, "Finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another." That's like saying be a friend that supports each other. "Love as brothers." That's what he's telling them, the brethren. "Be tender-hearted, be courteous, not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling." You don't deserve me to help you because you haven't always said good things about me. "But on the contrary, blessing, knowing that you were called to do this, you may inherit a blessing." In other words, when you have that kind of brotherly love. Verse 10, "He who would love life and see good days, let him refrain from the tongue of evil." He says a little more, but that kind of supports the principle. God is for us. He wants us to be kind, loving, and friendly. And that's what Fred tried to project to people on his mail route. Principle number 4. This is Fred Factor 4. The impact you have on others is its own reward. The impact you have on others is its own reward. In other words, you're happy because you're making somebody else happy. You're happy because you're making their life a little easier. You're handling the job better. Oh, they loved having Fred as their postman. So be happy to be helpful. And you'll have less negativity because you're being helpful. And you're not doing it for recognition. I think that's part of what I emphasize. He wasn't doing it, be sure and tell my boss what I did. He never said anything like that. He was not doing it for recognition. Matthew 25:37. Matthew 25:37. And Christ is talking to people about they're doing good things for him. And they said, then the righteous will answer him, because he put people in two categories, the righteous and the bad goats. He said, then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and fed you, or thirsty to give you drink? Verse 38. When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? And of course, you all know the answer, don't you? You know the answer. Be happy when others are happy. And like I served the local nursery by buying a bunch of plants, especially when it comes to tomatoes and squash. I think I lose money on the garden. I'm just serving the nursery that sells all that stuff, or I only save a few bucks and buying it at the store. But we do it for the process of doing it. Anyway, that's the point. You know, Christ says, when you did it for them, you did it for me. In other words, you don't do it so other people will give you recognition. You do it, and you know that God will recognize it. Christ will recognize it. Okay, here's a little corny story. My sister-in-law works in a big, nice restaurant in Atlanta, and their policy is when a big group comes in, a big table, they put the gratuity into the bill. I thought it was smart of Trump to say tips aren't taxed. Well, that's going to help him a lot. Anyway, so that's according with the restaurant policy. And so it was automatically added to the bill. And after she presented the bill to the father, he bellowed, "Gratuity! Gratuity! Who ordered gratuity? I told you kids not to order any dessert." Yeah, some people don't know what being grateful, gratuity for service is. But we want to show, you show the waiter gratuity, be gracious and thankful. And people that are gracious and giving are thankful. But Jesus notices when we are. Remember that. Verse 39 in Matthew 25. Or when did we see you sick or in prison or come to you? Verse 40. And the king will say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of my brethren, you did it to me. See, if you do it to a real important person with a lot of wealth and money, you'll probably get paid back or buy friends. You know how it is in the big wigs, people run to the guys with big money and, it's to my advantage. You're really not serving. You're serving your own interest. Or sometimes a company has this big check and they put it on the front page of the newspaper. We gave $1,000 to the whatever fund. That's just good publicity. But I don't think that's what Christ meant. To the least of these who can't pay you back. Verse 41. Then he will also say to those on his left, depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. So if you pray, if you do the right thing and serve people, you get praised by God. But if you do the wrong things, if you're cruel, you get the reward of being permanent ashes. In other words, the fire burns until it consumes what it's burning on. You become permanent ashes. The demons, we think, actually, they go through the fire and they end up in a bottomless pit. But for them, it's a different situation. But they're still angry because they're restrained in a dark pit. But we all want to be on the positive side of that. Fred factor number 5. Fred factor number 5. Live by the golden rule. Do unto others as you want them to do unto you. It's easy to say that, but it's hard to do. You got to think about the people you're serving. What would I want them to do for me? What would I not want them to do for me? Or how would I like them to do it for me? And then you try to do it the way that would be most helpful to them. I think the Duke's name was the Duke of Marlborough. It's amazing how your mind thinks of something. Then it comes out later when you're not thinking about it. Anyway, do unto others. And I think that's a good principle to have. God loves that principle. He really does. And it's not always easy to do that with all the negativity swirling around the world. And I'm not going to go to 1 Timothy 2 and 2 Timothy 2, but you know the scriptures. And it basically says in the end times, people will be they will have lost their love. They'll be unthankful and greedy and evil. And actually, it's very negative. And if you read all the way down to verse 7, and never come to a knowledge of the truth. I assume as we inch closer and closer to the end, it will get worse and worse. We're going to have a younger generation that is spoiled, rotten, unthankful. And I notice this among some young people. You owe it to me. They're not thankful. Give it to me and I want it now. Or athletes, and I understand it's a business, so I'm not saying I don't understand it. You know, college athletes have been making noise for years that we bring big bucks to university. We need to get paid. So now I understand that this year, at least if you're in one of the big conferences, the colleges will pay players. So they're now minor league professional athletes in the big sports. I assume that's basketball and football. And like, at least I read this last year, I assume something like that's true. Like, was it the quarterback of Alabama? He could make a deal with jersey companies and all those others. And he can get maybe $500,000 selling his likeness and his name. You can get his jersey. And like, if someone famous like, is it Archie Manning? I get the names wrong. One of those Manning sons, who may start for Texas this year. That's a big deal. He will probably be in a position, if he wants to make big bucks. Everybody wants big bucks. Or you hear about, the one thing I like about Tom Brady, I assume this is true, even when he was the number one quarterback in the league for a number of years, he was not the highest paid, because they have a salary cap. And he and Belichick, I guess, and the owners agreed, well, I'll take a high salary, not the highest, so we have more money to put good players around me. You realize that actually was smart of him? In the long run, it'll benefit him, because you can't win by yourself. My only point is we're going to be facing unselfish greed in the future. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit in a minute. Rule number 6, fear nothing except wasting time. Notice he says, don't say, well, I'm going to be the good worker, good servant, good mom, whatever it is, next year or next month. He says, that's how you procrastinate and don't do anything. Get on it right away. Determine what you're going to do and do it as well as you can right away. Now, number 7, that's added by me, and it kind of relates to what I just said. Number 7, it's not from Fred Factor book, is be thankful. And I think that whatever situation you're in, you'll be happier if you accept it. Let's say if you're in a particular job, be thankful that you got a job. Maybe your boss isn't the worst tyrant. Be thankful for that. Sure, if you get a chance to get a better job, take it. But I know some people, and anyway, you all probably could say the same thing too, that if you hate your job or you hate the situation you were born into, that's not going to make you happy. It won't help you at all. And I know we all have heard this many times. The world isn't fair. There are people who just have more than you have. They got lucky. They got all kind of breaks you didn't get. And that's always going to be true. But we're better off if we're thankful for what we do have. For instance, let's say if you grew up in a poor family, but there was something about your family and appreciating what they had and the discipline they gave you, you might have been actually luckier than the kid next door who was spoiled, had all kinds of good stuff. Think about that for a minute. You might have actually been luckier in the long run. You were just too stupid to appreciate it. Look at what he's got. Or like I've heard before, the kid next door, look at all those toys he's got. Don't worry about it. Or for adults, I guess toys or boats and electronic equipment, whatever it is. Try to be content with what you have and be thankful for what you have, and you'll be happier. You'll have less negativity. Make the most of your situation and appreciate it. Hebrews 13:15. Hebrews 13:15. Therefore, by him let us continually offer sacrifices of praise. That means thank God for your situation. That is the fruit of our lips, giving thanks. I'm going to emphasize that word, giving thanks to his name, but do not forget to do good. In other words, you're going to give thanks, but you're going to do good, which is kind of the Fred factor, and to share. That's kind of the Fred factor. For with such sacrifices, God is well pleased. And then there was a hardware store they talked about in the book. I won't go into too many details, but in the hardware store, he called it a Fred store. That's not actually the name of it. But he called it a real man store, hardware store. He said, whenever you came in the store, the owner greeted you. He was so happy you were there, like friendly. And then he would, you tell him, I want, kitchen cabinet features. He would send you to a section. They'd have a guy there who knew all about it, was helpful. He would tell you how to use it, how to put it in. And if they didn't have what you wanted, he said, we'll order it. And you give usually several different brands. You get some selection. They're very helpful. You go to a big box plumbing store. This happened to a lot of us. You go in there, you can't find anybody. You're looking for somebody to help. You got to wait. And then when you finally get somebody, at least sometimes, I don't know anything about this stuff. I just work here. I've heard that more than once. I've even heard a few workers were hiding out because they didn't want to help anybody. But that store was so helpful. It calls it a Fred store. And it's hard to get help nowadays. So, in conclusion, just want to reiterate these 7 points one more time, just so we can think about being a Fred factor. The news is bad, and you got to kind of, and often there is good news, they just don't cover it because bad news sells and they have their own biases, access to grind with the media. But number one, do good and you'll feel good. It fights negativity. Number two, the best Freds never rest. They're always helpful. Number three, treat people as friends. You want to serve them more and be kind and friendly. Principle number 4. Did I say that? I think I said it already. Yeah. The impact you have on people is its own reward. When you make others happy, that will make you happy. So the impact you have on others is its own reward. You're not looking for recognition. Principle number 5, live by the golden rule. Principle number 6, fear nothing. I fear giving too much service. People will lie to you. You got to have wisdom. But he says be bold and try to be a good servant. I say pray for wisdom because there are people that will try to take advantage of you. Although, if I had a choice between letting someone take advantage of me or being mean and cruel and heartless, I would take the choice of letting them take advantage of me as opposed to being cruel, mean, and heartless. Think about that. Paul even says in 2 Corinthians about lawsuits and things. He says, wouldn't you rather be taken than go to a court in front of the unbelievers and accuse other brethren? In other words, if it has to be that way, and that's part of what Christ said in Matthew 5 as well, don't go to court and fight with people and try to work it out. Number 6, fear nothing. Don't wait till next year. Get to it. And number 7, be thankful. Because ingratitude is related to unhappiness. I'm mad because I didn't get the biggest contract. So-and-so is making $2 million more than I am. Or I can see football players saying, the quarterback is getting bigger deals than I'm getting. I mean, in colleges, that's going to happen, don't you? I even see it in basketball. So-and-so is making more money. They're getting more fame than I am. I'm mad about it. I know I shouldn't joke about it, but you know what I mean. You can see it. Anyway, I can see it. They're roughing people up because they got more fame, more money than they're getting, and they're too dumb to realize actually the stars help the whole league. Don't worry about it. A lot of people don't get what they've got.